Metal Gear Solid VR missions, also known as special missions in some parts of the world, released in 1999 and is an expansion of the training mode featured in Metal Gear Solid. It is a series of bite-sized missions that gives you problems to solve and new stages to sneak through, but it's mostly known for being the game that lets you play as Grey Fox for a grand total of about 10 minutes, but I guess that's better than nothing. VR Missions is a sandbox of sorts that presents you with situations to solve through the trademarks of MGS1's gameplay. Some stages will have you navigating an area while avoiding guards before reaching the goal at the end. Other missions will have you massacring everyone in your way before reaching the goal. Lots of other missions involve using specific weapons to take down floating targets that fly around in the void. But VR Missions also likes to get a bit weirder than that, with murder mystery levels, puzzle-oriented stages that test your knowledge on how certain mechanics in MGS1 work, and some miscellaneous stages here and there that could only be cooked up in a simulation. At its core, VR Missions is a side game that takes the bones of MGS1's gameplay and tries to apply it to as many kinds of scenario as is possible within the confines of the systems at play. There are no additional mechanics or new weapons to use here. Everything that's available in Snake's toolkit will more than likely come into play at various points, but nothing about VR Missions is necessarily new by itself. VR Missions kind of fits in alongside the Majora's Masks or the Armored Core Master of Arenas of the world by being an expansion of the base game with more content to experience if that's something that you desire. A quicker style of asset flip that lets designers come up with new ideas in the sandbox they've created to deliver some fun gameplay. Dishonored did a similar thing with the Dunwall City Trials DLC, which was a series of challenges that tested you on various aspects of the game. Back when it came out though, it felt more like a bite-sized bonus DLC, and in comparison to the two Dowd-focused DLCs that came after it, it does feel like a strange addition nestled in between more intentioned content. VR Missions is a fun thing to look back on as something made just to mess around with MGS1's gameplay though. Like Dunwall City Trials, it's something you play if you specifically love the gameplay and want to be tested in new scenarios without a story obstructing the fun you can have with guided rockets. Metal Gear has dabbled in this exact sort of thing a few times with VR Missions modes in other games, and Portable Ops Plus acting as a special mission pack expansion of Portable Ops. This is a series that likes to see how far the gameplay can go in providing problems and creative solutions within their rule sets. There's a challenge being issued by the developers each time asking if you're really as big of a Metal Gear expert as you claim to be, and to that I say, well, I thought I was. Now, I personally do not love the gameplay side of MGS1 as much as I love the gameplay in the rest of the series. The stealth action of Shadow Moses is a little on the stiff side to me, and I don't find the bones to be too fun to crunch on. MGS1 is much more of a story-focused vibe game for me in comparison to something like MGS2 or 3, which feel like butter slathered in oil. But VR Missions still manages to take MGS1's gameplay and recontextualize it into something that I really like. I think deciding to focus on the rigid problem-solving aspect of MGS1's gameplay works for me because this is an environment where experimentation isn't really punished. It's genius because the way MGS1 works just so happens to fit in perfectly with this kind of stealth action puzzle-solving experience. You get given the opportunity to perfect your approach in these levels and essentially become a bite-sized speedrunner if you so desire. MGS1 is a stealth game that, like lots of other stealth games, focuses on routine and expectation. Guards have set patterns, limited reactions, and will likely do very similar things every time you rerun the game. This isn't a bad thing, but coupling that with how simplistic the structure of some levels are makes MGS1 feel like a very predictable game at times, with little variance to how you can approach certain situations in meaningfully different ways. VR Missions takes that criticism I have and turns it into its biggest strength, because that sense of routine is what it's founded on. Learning what a mission has put in front of you so that you can rerun it and get faster and better every time in mini stealth scenarios or combat encounters is a lot of fun. Also, by having so many little levels that will give you tons of new problems, it gifts anyone that's played Metal Gear Solid too many times with something that will cause a cold shiver to run down your back. Something new. There's also something so cool about how VR Missions is really gamified as an experience. MGS1 painstakingly folds everything into the context of its story and world. Every item you have is a reflection of real technology and likely has a codec call assigned to its use. Every action, no matter how silly or pissy, feels like a real element of the world at large. It connects you to the space and action and tension, but sometimes leaves little room for elements that feel decidedly more game-like. VR Missions is very arcade-like, where all of its elements are there for fun and interactivity without having to be tethered to a reason or story element. MGS1 is incredible for tying everything into something tangible and real, sometimes literally. But I see VR Missions as the dev team putting ideas into something that goes against the grain of what MGS1 did so well. The dev team crafted a game that works outside of the logic and reason established by Metal Gear Solid and instead solely focuses on creating fun gameplay problems to solve. Well, some of that isn't exactly true either. VR Missions does not magically exist outside of the bounds of Metal Gear Solid's world space. Snake himself refers to the VR training he undertook just before entering Shadow Moses, a reference to that training mode in MGS1.
Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
Thanks to the VR training I did on board the Discovery.
So you could look at VR Missions as an extension of the training that Snake put himself through to get ready to take on Foxhound. But then there are some elements that aren't exactly cohesive with that line of thought, like Grey Fox being playable before Snake even knows he exists.
Just getting warmed up.
My hand!
Naomi, I just had some kind of hallucination.
No, Snake. You killed my benefactor and sent my brother home a cripple.
Oh yeah.
One of the biggest complaints about Metal Gear Solid back in the day was that the game was too short. Fair enough, I guess, because it is about an 8 or 9 hour game if you just blitz through it without taking your time to get extra codec calls, wander around Shadow Moses, weep at what the PlayStation was capable of. VR Missions tries to squash that concern this time around by having over 300 missions for you to lose yourself in. Content, value like you've never seen before. Enough content to really make your wallet solid. The other thing that sells VR Missions is that the main reward for clearing every stage and scoring 100% completion is a tease for what's to come next in the next generation sequel. Metal Gear Solid 2, with the first ever image of Metal Gear Ray. All of this stuff points to VR Missions being something different to Snake's training before Shadow Moses. Another perspective is that VR Missions is the training that Raiden undertook before the events of MGS2, hence why he knows how to use a sword immediately and why there are so many references to VR throughout the game. That all makes complete sense in retrospect, but I don't think this was necessarily the idea implanted into VR Missions itself. MGS2 retroactively references and adapts it into its story, but VR Missions itself does not reference the sequel outside of the very end image, which wouldn't make much sense if it was shown to Raiden, because why would he need to know about the new Metal Gear design? Metal Gear is very well known for recontextualizing information in later games to suit the ongoing narratives of the series. It's why I tend to view each Metal Gear entry as its own standalone story for the most part, because the amount of retcons will break your brain eventually. I mean, there's a whole wiki page about this exact thing. So sure, VR Missions is the training that Raiden undertook prior to the events of MGS2, but what about within the text of VR Missions itself? What is it exactly in the context of itself? When all of this starts to be questioned, it does make me wonder what VR Missions even is. Who are we playing as? Why are we here? What is this all for? Who pulls the strings? Who is plugged into the simulation? Well, I think the answer is that it's you. The entire Metal Gear series likes to play with the idea of the player having some kind of meta involvement within the games. The lines between Solid Snake and the video game player are constantly a little blurred. Whether that's contacts on the codec referring to the controls of a video game, or the back of the box specifically saying, "You are Snake." I mean, it really can't be more obvious than that. The protagonist and the player always has this inexplicable link that the games never directly acknowledge, but constantly refer to. Many games do this, of course. Tutorialization of any kind is a meta reference to the real world we inhabit, but Metal Gear specifically has characters voice these aspects to Snake and thereby to you. There's also this element of each game ending by severing the link between Snake and the player somehow. Whether that's due to New Horizons calling or battles coming to an end, Snake and the player's time together usually comes to a fairly conclusive end as the stories continue on in the world without the watchful eye of gamers everywhere. VR Missions, though, is decidedly lacking in this same sort of meta partition breaking. It doesn't spend nearly as much time having individuals give you coded game information in the guise of their characters. Mei Ling does not explain what this virtual reality simulation is, even though I think that would have been pretty nice to see. You do get some form of praise every time you complete a stage, though, with Naomi Hunter saying,
"Impressive, Snake."
In this context, Snake is you. She is congratulating you, the player, because you are Snake in this simulation, as she basically says, "Good boy," and I cry with joy. Even the ending of VR Missions lacks the same severing connection at the end of most Metal Gears enact. Characters usually do go off on their journeys and earn their freedom from the mission, but in the case of VR Missions, you're shown the next Metal Gear threat to come and are booted right back into the rhythm of the game. As long as VR Missions is being played on your PlayStation, that connection between it and you will never be severed. You are the protagonist, you are the avatar of Solid Snake. None of this is beyond the bounds of what MGS1 tells you outright. None of this is going to be surprising to hear because of the meta nature at the core of Metal Gear. So why is it interesting? Well, there's ideas here about building a soldier, building someone up through simulated conflicts to get them thinking like a fighter, teaching someone to walk before putting a gun in their hand and telling them to take those steps again and this time leave no witnesses. There is an insidious nature to VR missions underneath the surface, somewhere below the fun arcadey nature of rerunning stages, getting better times, and viewing facsimiles of people as obstructive data. There's some kind of uncomfortable nature at the core of this, because that's the other thing Metal Gear likes to do. Conspiracy, mystery, motivations, governments saying one thing and doing another, lies built on top of a kind of truth.
Goodbye, Mr. President.
The Lawnmower Man is a 1992 sci-fi horror film that centers on a researcher's attempt to give man higher intelligence through the use of virtual reality and computer simulation. It is a movie with lots of extremely outdated elements which come together to be a fascinating time capsule of the era. Through the use of early 90s visual effects, it gives us a look into how this era visualized the world of virtual reality to come and its potential impact on the average person. It doesn't make the statement that every person who engages with virtual reality will become an omnipotent god complex driven cyber demiurge, but it does suggest that our grip on physical, tangible reality will be loosened with time as virtual realities become more viscous and intersect with our ways of life. The use of 3D imagery that, by our modern eyes, looks kind of terrifying works to show how alien the concepts of a digital landscape were at the time of its release. But looking back on it now, there's a dreamlike quality to all of these scenes. I hate using words like dreamlike to describe this sort of thing, but I really don't think there's a better word for it. It is dreamlike in the sense of how these images cascade and collide, how they form and reform into vaguely recognizable shapes and faces. I close my eyes and after a while this is the world I see. Effects like these will always be fascinating to look back on because we move further and further away from the need to abstract these sorts of ideas because they're there in the palms of our hands every day now. And it's not like we can't conjure up visuals like this right now. Images like these are certainly more than possible with our technology as it currently stands, but in most consumer level products there'd be no need for any of this. There's no incentive to drawing out the abstract, of painting a moving, bizarre dream that subsumes the psyche. Lawnmower Man's position is that virtual reality is an exciting, frightening, and wholly demented place, that it's a pathway to experiences that sit quietly in the back of all our brains, waiting to be coaxed out by some form of stimulation. These images are within all of us somewhere deep down, but looking at the way in which technology is positioned to us now, tech is more so seen as an extension of the world as we see and know it, of images that seek to offer safe realities that mimic our everyday lives, at least in the mainstream consumer space. For video games that seek to be more and more realistic, hiding that which illustrates the simulations that they are, there's a distinct value proposition to more powerful gaming hardware that is able to portray the world on screen as inseparable to the world around you. Look at the pores, look at how many rocks there are. Concepts of detail that will always be a little bit silly because we all acknowledge that reality and unreality are two different things. If we see it on a screen, we know that it isn't actually happening right in front of us, and so trying to completely artificially recreate a world as realistically as possible is a difficult challenge. We acknowledge that images are images, and though they can instill very real emotions in us, we also know that there's a degree of fabrication, direction, and abstraction to what we are seeing. So what value is there in agonizing over every single detail in a world space when inferring and stylization can often be even more emotive? A modern, realistic 3D recreation of a countryside field with trees is just that. It's exactly like you'd see it as if you were really there yourself for the most part. The illusion of reality breaks when you look at the extremely small details of the world at large, but viewed from a macro, this is really real. Compare this to the same intentions 20 years ago. The illusion is something you have to actively buy into, something you have to spend more concentration immersing yourself into. But for some, that very journey is what gives these spaces their flavor to begin with. The artistic intent is clear, and the techniques used to approximate the concepts of design drawn on the page are beautiful. Buying into a world that is so obviously a fantasy where your imagination often has to fill in the blanks creates a distinctly different relationship versus a world that tries to stuff all the answers down your throat. Realism isn't always a bad thing to aim for, of course, and some worlds do benefit from the approach. The issue lies in homogenizing any art form that utilizes the visual. Styles are necessary to provide context and tone that allows different pieces to stand apart. My fear is of realism almost always being a goal and homogenizing video game aesthetics into one amorphous blob. Res is a game where you float across a sea of metamorphosing data as your own form slowly evolves through the collection of these little blue boxes. Digital immersion takes on a whole new meaning when you're quite literally being pulled further and further in by the current. Res is one of the best video game examples we have of a digiscape like the one represented in Johnny Mnemonic, where the data world is similarly represented as an overwhelming barrage of information. It's designed to be almost impossible to pass, and when things do appear that bear some resemblance to our world, we know it to be a series of fake facsimiles. A face can appear as if conjured up by liquid metal, but it's less a means of earnest communication and more of a horror show about where human connection could potentially go in the near future. I also think about Spider-Man. In the movie tie-in game for the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, you've got a training mode that takes little snippets of environments from the rest of the game and tosses them into a giant room walled off with a grid. Bruce Campbell narrates the training mode and mocks you for being a stupid little baby gamer.
Up on the compass means forward to you. You follow me? Well, stop following me or I'll have you arrested.
I remember kind of being a little intimidated by this place though as a kid, because I had already played a few of the regular levels in the game and stumbled across the training mode after, and to see the city I knew be replaced with this dark void was a realization that, yeah, all of this is fake. It was all set dressing made to make me believe that I am Spider-Man, which, I mean, I could be. You never know. I guess that might be why I'm so fascinated by VR missions in the first place. VR missions is almost an admission of what's unreal about Metal Gear Solid. It's an honest lie about what MGS is. It's not a world, it's a series of lines of code executed to form the experience you see on screen. You are the participant in this experiment, and what comes next is for your eyes only. VR missions makes me feel trapped and suffocated. Its void-like, simplistic nature strikes against the lived-in feel of MGS1. VR missions feels like it sanitizes the world of Metal Gear and purposely reduces it to a series of blocks and shapes. Eventually, even the guards lose their form and twist into bizarre, target dummy amalgamations. In creating a world of control and sanitization, it creates the perfect breeding ground to produce a player that sees playing the game as a form of endless perfection. The artificial nature of the simulation creates a scenario that forces the player to approach it in a purely calculative way. VR missions ultimately becomes the very thing that Metal Gear exists in opposition to. Fighting without having a good reason, conflict without purpose, is a meaningless pursuit. You have to find the meaning in the things you do, and the moment you become trapped in a war without end and no future in sight, you slowly lose the battle ahead of you.
Impressive, Snake.
Virtual realities and datascapes often have to find neat ways of visually conveying the truth that everything you're seeing isn't based in reality, that what you're consuming is in fact a digital recreation within a digitized piece of work. It's quite a funny relationship when you think about it, how code is used to render out code in a visual format. Lots of films and games have taken stabs at illustrating datascapes over the years, but Metal Gear Solid always did it in a way that I especially loved. Information is drawn in the background as a constantly moving image, morphing, redefining its meanings, but being equally incomprehensible no matter what. The information has no relevance, but its density still fills the entirety of the main menu screen. MGS1's use of this background is important because it highlights the era the story takes place in, an information age where everything is known, quantified, and understood, or that's what we think. Comparing this to the main menu of VR missions, the same broad idea of a constantly moving wall of information is here, but this time you can make out circuit boards, gene sequences, and hexagonal shapes, which would make a return in Metal Gear Solid 2's main menu, as does the gene sequences near the top and bottom of the screen. Even the schematic of Ray makes another appearance when you have a cleared game. Information is now represented as the components that make up both virtual and organic organisms. The things that make up a computer and a person are one in this space. Virtual reality has combined the two into one so that the lines between what's real and what isn't doesn't matter so much. Gray Fox's role as the title screen hero makes this connection even more obvious, as he himself is a cross between organic and artificial components. A cyborg ninja that houses the memories and pain of Gray Fox, while also possessing incredible abilities only possible by this intersection of humanity and technology. VR Missions itself is sort of a similar relationship when you think about it, as is any interactable digital experience. You, the player, as the organic, and the game as the digital, coming together to form a tight partnership. The environments in VR Missions are suitably simplistic, lacking the excruciating amount of textural detail of MGS1 and instead focusing on color. Outside the bounds of the platform lies the background, which is the return of that MGS1 main menu. It's pasted across the environment as a flat video that doesn't move based on your perspective, and that makes staring into it a little discombobulating. After a while, you kinda just forget that though. The visual flair of VR Missions is simple, it is effective. It is a little boring in comparison to some other examples of digital landscapes, but that feels intentional to still make VR Missions feel like a part of Metal Gear's world and to keep the player's immersion in it unchanged. They certainly could have gone LSD Dream Emulator levels of wacky over it, but they didn't, and I think that works out just fine. Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere is a flight simulator in more ways than one. Electrosphere is a compound word for the mental image of the space in a computer network, as defined by the game. Electro for electrical and sphere for spherical body of particles. Once again, we have this combination of digital and chemical aspects forming a greater whole. In this case, the Electrosphere is a kind of digital environment that immerses you into a network, with the game describing it as the act of accessing the information stored in each address on the network, which is reminiscent of the act of moving freely through it to reach the desired information as if it were a physical space. The game's main menu takes place in this Electrosphere as your hub for accessing logs of information about the world, previous interactions with characters, and for starting the next mission. It is a hub where all of the main functions of the game are accessible, and it provides you with a place to collect your thoughts. The navigation of the Electrosphere isn't unlike a website or social system of some kind where the collection of information is undertaken by looking to news broadcasts or chatting with your friends. But the nature of simulation goes much deeper than just this Electrosphere. The whole game is in fact a simulation run by a distraught man looking for revenge. The narrative is a tangled web of events though, and that's not really what matters right now. This simulation is designed to create a handful of scenarios dictated by player choice, with the scenario concluding in various ways, some breaking the bounds of the simulation's reality. When this happens, reality is warped and twisted into this cascading corridor of lines and motion perpetually pushing you forward. You're no longer flying through the sky, you're falling into an abyss of code. Knowing that Ace Combat 3 is in actuality a simulation fundamentally changes the relationship it has to the player. In no way is it hinted that this is the case until you reach one of many endings. The lie is so uncomfortably real that it leaves the player in a sort of bewildered state by the end. I start to question if anything I did really mattered, if the choices I made and the missions I undertook had any purpose. I'm left at the end of it all with a feeling that I've been used and that the world outside of this system may in fact look completely different to how I imagine it. But is this experience really so devalued by it being a simulation? Were the thoughts and feelings I had at points never real to begin with? Did my emotions and connection to certain characters dissolve the moment I discovered that these versions of them don't yet exist? These are the questions that Ace Combat 3 puts forward. Just because these events are simulated and have not yet occurred in the physical world does not mean that they do not have significance. Video games are themselves simulated realities, so who cares if Ace Combat 3 is about a simulated reality? Is it not the same as VR missions in that sense? Well, the main difference is that VR missions is honest about what it is immediately. Ace Combat 3 is as well, it just decides not to tell you until the time is right. So what this really is about is power. Ace Combat 3 gives you the power of flight, of soaring through the sky in a fighter jet and dealing with enemies on the ground and sky. In many ways, power is what makes Ace Combat as a series work so well. That form and feeling of flight and control is fun and engaging, and few games deliver it in such a high-octane way, all the while delivering an emotional story of conflict with that music guiding the experience in such a way that I never quite expected until I finally played through one of these games recently. But upon discovering that this game is a simulation, you realize that that feeling of power was orchestrated. It was conducted by an outside force you've never met, someone you've never known existed, guided and crafted your journey, and all the emotions, the highs, lows, all of it was carefully put together to make you feel a certain way. I never had any power in this at all. I simply played out the role that the simulation wanted me to play out. Power and control in the context of a simulation are concepts that depend on perspective above all else. If a player can simply choose to put a controller down, then they aren't subservient to what's on screen. But what if the joy of the simulation stimulates desires and lulls them into the scenario? At that point, is the player still cognizant of what they're partaking in, or will it take a wake-up call to sever the connection? VR missions makes use of the player in a very similar way, but does not reveal the truth about what's actually going on here. In terms of how it functions within the world of Metal Gear, we never know who has been plugged into the simulation to allow us to play in this space. We never know why any of this has been created, or why Solid Snake is the avatar to train whoever may be plugged in. All I know is that I have the controller in my hand, and I am doing everything I am told to do. It's time to get serious though. Gray Fox is the real selling point as he's on the cover and takes center stage on the main menu now, but like I mentioned, he only has 3 levels, which really is not enough. His toolkit consists of sword attacks he can perform while standing or running, a lunge attack that covers distance and slashes through enemies like butter, a jump and stealth camo, oh, and he also gets to scream in agonizing pain to kill enemies that gang up on him. I also have this power. The stealth camo and the scream both drain health, so you're encouraged to not use them and instead utilize the jump to gain a height advantage and strike fast before enemies know you're there. It really highlights how much the Metal Gear Solid gods struggle to tilt their heads up, because past a certain verticality, they will just completely ignore you. But this rigid horizontalness of Metal Gear Solid is why Gray Fox's ability to jump is so impressive. It completely changes how you approach the same sorts of problems that MGS1 presents. Instead of walking around a big box to get a guard, just jump over the thing and ruin his day completely. There's really not much to say about this mode though. It's something that, if it were properly expanded upon, could have introduced some fascinating levels to mess around with. As it stands though, I just don't think there's enough for Gray Fox to do here. Maybe it's a victim of time constraints or limitations of other kinds that prevented the dev team from doing more with this. Whatever the reason, it's a massive disappointment considering how much this mode is teased to you. But I will say that it's interesting that these levels forego the standard aesthetic of VR missions. Those gridded boxes are nowhere to be seen here. Instead, we've got a stage that looks a lot lot more like something you'd see in Shadow Moses. It makes me wonder if this was some kind of cut area from MGS1 that never got used until VR missions. I doubt it's really going for this sort of thing, but I like that Grey Fox's levels better obfuscate the nature that this is all a simulation. Given that Grey Fox's own hold on reality at this point in the story is loose at best, it's fascinating to see that his missions are more heavily constructed to be a fake form of reality. It's a simple room, but one that tricks you just a little bit more than the rest of the game's levels. In fact, could there be an argument that this VR training is from the perspective of Grey Fox throughout? Perhaps his training after becoming the cyborg ninja first required him to relive his experience as a foxhound operative. Solid Snake as the avatar would make a certain amount of sense given Grey Fox's obsession with Snake to have one final battle. Perhaps training as Snake would give Fox more of a sense of Snake's own approach to dealing with certain scenarios. And again, Grey Fox is the title character on the main menu. VR Missions is advertised and sold to you using his imagery. Knowing all of this and seeing how he is utilized makes me wonder if this could all be his experience in VR. As we come to the end of VR missions though, there is one mode that I think people tend to gloss over, which is the photography mode with Mei Ling and Naomi Hunter. In this mode, you are placed on a gigantic platform in a void as the model of Mei Ling or Naomi is placed in the center of the arena. As you approach the center, flashes will appear at intervals on screen and stop once you approach the model. You have 10 minutes in this space to watch the model move and take photos as and when you please. How close you can get to the models depends on your completion percentage of VR missions. At 100% completion, you can get as close to them as you want. It's a pretty creepy incentive no matter how you slice it because it positions these models as simply a reward for doing good at the video game. But these are the reflections of real characters in this universe. There's really no way to look at this as anything but a form of objectification and gratification for the player for doing well. This mode was done to highlight the potential power of the PS1's ability to portray more complex models that could use their faces to emote and more complex animations that could evoke different states. Boredom, playfulness, a cutesy kind of dynamic. But this mode is also inherently about roles. The model is in the center of the stage as a non-interactive puppet, acting through various animation stages and is completely non-reactive to the player. It is fulfilling the role of a model in a scenario, but unlike the conventions of a video game, it is completely uninterruptible, non-interactive, and plays its cues without any input from the player whatsoever. The player then is supposed to act out the role of the photographer, so this isn't a completely non-interactive scenario across the board. It's just the model that doesn't get freedom or a say in what goes on here. And yeah, this is kind of creepy. And whether intentional or not, I think it does say some fascinating stuff about how we interact with figures through a digital world. Then there's this void you find yourself in. Unlike the space filled by the rest of the VR missions, it's a dark void with nothing to see. It's a creepy place to wander about in where you and a lifeless puppet imitating the characters you know lulls you into this sense of false digital connection. You capture their visages on a digital camera, store them on your memory card, and feel power in the knowledge that you can go back anytime to take as many photos as you want. These on-screen models are there to serve the player. This argument then suggests that the model is an emblem of power and control, that your ability to take photographs in this void space grants you all the power. But there are limitations in place. The model only has a set amount of animations. The time limit yanks you out of the space every 10 minutes. At no point are you given complete and total freedom in this scenario. You can only act out the role of the photographer just as the 3D model acts out the part of the subject. In this virtual reality, you actually have no real power to do anything outside of the bounds of this simulation. Once again, the only choices you have are to fulfill the role the simulation demands or leave it entirely. The choice is yours, but participation within the confines of this virtual reality, in this sense, is no different to the scenarios that have already been laid out before you. This was always about getting you to participate in various scenarios. It's only now that it's so simple and laid out before you that something feels kind of off about it. It's the blandness of the staging, the honesty standing at the core of it that's unsettling, and it just so happens that this staging is exactly where the climax of Metal Gear Solid 2 begins, the stage where the virtual reality is stripped back to reveal the puppet standing in the center of the arena. At the end, what have I become? What has VR Missions done to me once 100% completion has been achieved? The tease for what's next is placed onto the screen. All of this has been preparation for what is to come in Metal Gear Solid 2, the skills I've taken in, the problems I've solved, and the ways in which I've perceived puppets in a digital space. How easily humanity can be ripped out of a subject only to dangle him around for your amusement. In the end, I think VR Missions is a statement about how malleable digital spaces can be. Nothing here is necessarily new or different to what is found in MGS1. Nearly everything that is possible to do in one game is indeed possible in the other, but the set dressing, the efficacy of the production, and the tools needed to make you buy into reality are what's missing in VR Missions. This set of 300 missions does not have a narrative connecting the gameplay scenarios. It doesn't really have a clear-cut motive to present ideas to you like MGS1 does. Nevertheless, it does end up presenting some fascinating concepts that Metal Gear Solid 2 will have to delve more into, not just because VR missions tease up the questions, but because investigating the powers of the digital realm are simply what Metal Gear is going to do. MGS1 establishes that the world of Metal Gear is on a knife's edge of progress, like our very own. Technology is being used to create brand new weapons of mass destruction and hysteria. Rex is a technological marvel, a cool as hell mech with the capabilities to destroy the world if its masters deem that to be the course forward. Scientists with dreams of benefiting mankind are being used to further agendas of control and government. Soldiers that want to believe in a higher cause, a reason to keep fighting for their beliefs, are being tossed aside in favor of brand new slaves and tools that will do the bidding of these masters. MGS1 paints a bleak picture of the world. Shadow Moses hid secrets down below in the dark recesses of the island, but that was only skin deep in comparison to what's really being kept hidden from the rest of the world. But still, there is a hopeful note right at the end. Snake and Otacon, the canon ending in my eyes, ride off into the sunrise together, eager to see the day and to work toward their own goals. No longer will they be the tools of the government or anyone else. They'll be free to live as people. But the visage of Solid Snake, his avatar, the representation of his abilities and persona, is trapped in virtual reality. The idea of Snake as the soldier, as the tool of a government, is still very much enslaved in the digital realm. MGS1's ending is meant to show that we do have the power to fight our own battles no matter what the world or the DNA written into our genes tells us. But VR Missions also tells us that technology is powerful. We can fight on behalf of our own personal goals and ideals, but technology can warp our perspective, distort our sense of being, and project a person in a virtual space with ease. I don't think VR Missions is necessarily trying to be a doomer version of the future. It's not trying to undercut the ending of Metal Gear Solid, but it is showing what state the world of Metal Gear is in. The ever-flowing tide of information and digital control is being reformed and redefined with each and every day. And soon, the perfect soldier won't be someone with the ideals and spirit to fight for what's right. The perfect soldier will be a victim of circumstance, thrown into a world of simulations and forced to fight in a war that was never meant to exist. To partake in informational conflict where context and content is controlled and diverted to guide the masses into one direction. Raiden is a combination of these ideas. He is someone who has his hopes and ideals crushed by the world around him. He is forced to become a weapon and a tool by the digital world that contorted his vision. He is a representation of the player that went through all of the training of the previous game, VR missions, and now is ready to take on the next mission, without even catching that the world around you has been artificially constructed once again. VR missions is so important to Metal Gear Solid 2 because of the realization that you never actually left a simulation. You're still there right now, and I don't think there's an easy way out.
And now you've been led back to war by something less than real.
Thank you to the supporters and those who come after.